James Crawford collapsed on the rain-soaked pavement outside his former home, his trembling hands clutching the divorce papers that had shredded his world just hours ago. His wife Rachel had divorced him to marry his best friend Devin, taking their triplets, Emma, Noah, and Lily, with her, convinced she was leaving behind a struggling construction worker who could barely afford their rent. But what Rachel didn't know was that beneath James's paint-stained overalls and calloused hands lay a secret $7.5 billion fortune he'd been hiding for 15 years, waiting for the woman who would love him for who he truly was, not what he possessed. Now, as a mysterious black sedan pulled up beside his broken body and a woman in an expensive suit stepped out with documents bearing his real name, James Theodore Crawford III, heir to the Crawford global empire, everything was about to change. When Rachel discovered the truth 3 weeks later, scrolling through her phone at 2 a.m. while Devin snored beside her, she saw James's face plastered across every financial news outlet with the headline, "Billionaire reveals identity after faking his death for love, now seeking full custody." What would Rachel do when she realized she'd thrown away not just billions, but the only man who had ever truly loved her? How would she face their triplets when they discovered their father wasn't the failure she'd painted him to be? And what shocking revelation would James unveil in court that would make Rachel question everything she thought she knew about their entire marriage? The hospital fluorescent lights burned James's retinas as consciousness crawled back into his body like shattered glass reassembling itself. His head throbbed with a symphony of pain that matched the rhythm of his fragmenting heart. Each beat a reminder that Rachel had actually done it. She had divorced him. After 12 years of marriage, after building what he thought was an unbreakable bond, after creating 3 beautiful souls together, Emma with her infectious laugh, Noah with his curious questions about everything, and Lily with her fierce protectiveness over her siblings. Rachel had chosen Devin, his best friend since college, the man who had stood beside him at their wedding, who had held each of their triplets minutes after they were born, who had eaten at their table every Sunday for a decade. James tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pressed against his shoulder. The woman from the sedan stood beside his bed, her silver hair pulled back in an immaculate bun, her gray eyes holding secrets that made his chest tighten. Margaret Hastings, his family's head attorney, the woman who had helped him orchestrate the greatest disappearance in American business history 15 years ago, when he'd walked away from his $7.5 billion inheritance at 23 to find real love, untainted by the stench of old money and social climbing. "Mr. Crawford," Margaret's voice carried the weight of everything he'd been running from. "It's time to come home." James closed his eyes and the memories flooded through him like a dam breaking. He was 23 again, standing in his father's mahogany-paneled office in Manhattan, surrounded by men in $1,000 suits who saw him as nothing more than a chess piece in their corporate games. His father, Theodore Crawford II, had just announced James's arranged marriage to Victoria Ashford, a woman he'd met twice, whose family's telecommunications empire would merge perfectly with Crawford Global's infrastructure holdings. The deal was worth billions. James's happiness was worth nothing. "I won't do it," James had said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I want to find someone who loves me for who I am, not what I'm worth." His father had laughed, a cold sound that held no warmth. "Love? You foolish boy. Love is a luxury we cannot afford. Our name, our legacy, these are what matter." That night, James had made his decision. With Margaret's help, who had been his late mother's closest friend and confidant, he'd staged his disappearance. A hiking accident in the Rockies. A body never found. The media had feasted on it for months. The tragic death of the Crawford heir. Meanwhile, James had emerged in a small Ohio town with a new identity, a fabricated background, and a construction job that left his hands blistered and his body exhausted in ways that felt honest and real. He'd met Rachel 2 years later at a community center, where he'd been volunteering to build playground equipment for underprivileged kids. She was a teacher, working with children who had special needs, and when she smiled at him across that dusty lot, something in his chest had shifted. She didn't see a Crawford. She saw James, just James, A man with kind eyes and strong hands who made her laugh and listened when she talked about her dreams of creating an inclusive education program. Their courtship had been simple, beautiful. Dinners at affordable restaurants, walks through parks, movie nights on his worn couch. When he'd proposed with a modest ring that had taken him 3 months to save for, Rachel had cried and said yes without hesitation. She'd loved him when he was nothing but a construction worker with big dreams and calloused palms. That was supposed to be enough. That was supposed to prove she was different. But somewhere between the birth of their triplets 7 years ago and yesterday afternoon, something had changed. The financial stress of raising 3 children on his modest salary had worn Rachel down. He'd seen it in her eyes, the way she'd linger on advertisements for things they couldn't afford, the way she'd go quiet when other mothers at school pickup talked about their family vacations, the way she'd started comparing their life to what Devin could offer. Devin had inherited his family's chain of car dealerships 3 years ago. Nothing compared to James's hidden fortune, but to Rachel's eyes, Devin looked like success. Devin drove a Lexus. Devin wore designer watches. Devin took lavish vacations and posted them on social media. And Devin had been whispering poison in Rachel's ear for months, James realized now, telling her she deserved better, telling her that James would never amount to anything, telling her that he could give her and the triplets the life they deserved. The affair had started 6 months ago. James had known. He'd seen the signs, the late-night texts Rachel tried to hide, the new lingerie he couldn't afford that appeared in her drawer, the way she'd started finding reasons to leave the house when Devin called. He'd confronted her 2 months ago, and she denied everything with tears streaming down her face, swearing her loyalty, begging him to trust her. He'd wanted to believe her so desperately that he'd ignored the evidence his heart already knew. Yesterday, Devin had finally made his move. He'd shown up at their small rental house, the house James had deliberately chosen to maintain his cover, even though he could have bought Rachel a mansion with pocket change, and told James the truth. Rachel was divorcing him. She and Devin were getting married. They'd already consulted lawyers about custody. Devin could provide for the triplets in ways James never could. They deserve a father who can actually take care of them, Devin had said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You're a good guy, James, but let's be honest. You're a failure. You work construction for God's sake. Rachel and those kids are eating pasta 4 nights a week while you pretend you're going to make something of yourself someday. James had stood there frozen as everything he'd built crumbled around him. He could have ended it right there. Could have pulled out his phone and shown Devin exactly who he was. Could have revealed the monthly statements that showed his $7.5 billion fortune had grown to nearly $9 billion in the years he'd been gone, carefully managed by Margaret and a team of financial advisors who thought their client was dead. Could have watched Devin's face drain of color as he realized he'd just made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in America. But he hadn't, because he'd needed to know if Rachel would choose him anyway. If, when faced with the decision, she'd remember their vows. If she'd remember the man she'd fallen in love with, regardless of his bank account. He'd needed to know if 12 years of marriage and 3 beautiful children meant something. Rachel had arrived home an hour later with the divorce papers already signed. She'd looked at him with eyes that held no trace of the woman who'd once loved him, only exhaustion and resignation. I'm sorry, James, she'd said, her voice flat, but I can't do this anymore. I can't watch my children struggle because you refuse to be more than you are. Devin loves me. He loves the kids. And he can give us the life we deserve. James had watched, numb, as Rachel packed bags for herself and the triplets. Emma had cried, clutching his leg, asking why Mommy was making them leave. Noah had stood silent, his 7-year-old eyes too knowing, too sad. Lily had screamed that she hated Mommy, that she wanted to stay with Daddy, and Rachel had carried her out while she kicked and sobbed. The door had closed. His family was gone, and James had collapsed. Now in this sterile hospital room, Margaret was offering him back everything he'd run from. The board has been patient, Mr. Crawford, she said softly, but Crawford Global needs its heir. Your father passed away 18 months ago. The company has been operating under interim leadership, but there are hostile takeover attempts, internal power struggles. If you don't step forward and claim your position, Everything your family built will be lost. James stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. His father was dead. The man who'd tried to force him into a loveless marriage, who'd valued legacy over happiness, was gone. And somehow that hurt more than James expected. They'd never reconciled. Theodore had died thinking his son was long dead, lost to the mountains 15 years ago. James had denied himself even the chance to say goodbye because he'd been so determined to prove a point about love. And for what? To end up here, divorced by a woman who'd thrown him away the moment someone with more money came along? To lose his children because he'd been too stubborn to admit that maybe, just maybe, his father had been right about something. That in this world, money did matter. Whether you wanted it to or not. What about my children? James's voice cracked. What about Emma, Noah, and Lily? Margaret pulled out her tablet, her expression turning sharp and focused. That's why I'm here, Mr. Crawford. The moment you reclaim your identity, you'll have access to resources that make custody battles very, very different. The best family lawyers in the country, private investigators who can document every aspect of your ex-wife's relationship with Mr. Devon, financial analysts who can prove you're more than capable of providing for your children. She paused, meeting his eyes. But more than that, you'll be telling your children the truth, that their father isn't a failure, that he sacrificed everything, his name, his fortune, his family legacy, because he believed in love. That he lived as a working-class man, not because he couldn't be more, but because he wanted to find something real. Don't you think they deserve to know who their father really is? James thought of his triplets, of Emma's laugh, Noah's questions, Lily's fierce loyalty. He'd wanted to give them a normal childhood, free from the burden of being Crawford heirs. He'd wanted them to grow up knowing the value of hard work, of honest living, of relationships built on genuine connection rather than social obligation. But in protecting them from his world, had he failed to protect them in theirs? Tell me what I need to do, James said, his voice stronger now. Margaret smiled, and it was the first genuine warmth he'd seen from her in 15 years. First, we get you out of this hospital. Then we hold a press conference that will shake the financial world to its core. And then, Mr. Crawford, we go to war. The press conference was scheduled for 3 days later, which gave Margaret's team exactly 72 hours to transform James Crawford, the construction worker, back into James Theodore Crawford III, heir to a $9 billion fortune. They'd set up operations in a penthouse suite at the Meridian Hotel, the most expensive property in the city, and James felt like an actor being prepared for the role of his life, except this role was supposedly who he'd been born to be. A stylist named Veronica descended on him with scissors and products, taming his shaggy hair into something sleek and professional. A tailor took measurements with practiced efficiency, promising suits that would project power and confidence. Margaret's assistant, a sharp young woman named Claire, briefed him on 15 years of Crawford Global Developments, mergers, acquisitions, and boardroom politics he'd missed while playing pretend in Ohio. But it was the moments alone, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at a city that suddenly felt both familiar and alien, when James questioned everything. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos of his triplets. Emma's gap-toothed smile on her first day of second grade. Noah concentrating fiercely on a Lego creation that had taken him weeks. Lily covered in mud after soccer practice, holding up a trophy with pride. Rachel was in some of these photos back when she'd still looked at him with something resembling love. He'd taken these children to public parks and free museum days. He'd taught them to find joy in simple things, catching fireflies on summer nights, making pancakes on Saturday mornings, reading stories until they fell asleep. Would they hate him when they learned the truth? Would they feel betrayed, knowing he could have given them more but chose not to? Or would they understand that he'd been trying to give them something money couldn't buy? His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. Saw the news. This is Michael Chen. We worked together on the Morrison project. Just wanted to say congratulations on whatever's happening and that you were the best foreman I ever worked with. You treated everyone with respect, no matter what. Don't forget that, whatever comes next. James stared at the message, his throat tight. Michael was a young laborer he'd mentored 2 years ago, teaching him carpentry skills and helping him study for his contractor's license. James had recommended him for a supervisory position last year. These were the relationships he'd built in his hidden life. Real, earned, meaningful. How did they balance against the birthright he was about to reclaim? Mr. Crawford, Claire appeared in the doorway, her expression sympathetic. There's something you should see. She handed him a tablet showing a social media post from Rachel's account, published 3 hours ago. The photo showed Rachel and Devin with the triplets at some upscale restaurant, all of them smiling. The caption read, "New beginnings with the man who shows me and my babies what we're really worth. Sometimes you have to let go of what's holding you back to fly forward. Grateful for real love and real partnership." The comments were full of support from friends and acquaintances who had no idea what had really happened. "You deserve this happiness. Devin is such a great guy. Those kids are so lucky." Each word was a knife. Rachel was rewriting their story, making herself the heroine who'd escaped a deadbeat husband, painting Devin as the savior, and their children were being used as props in this narrative. In the photo, Emma's smile didn't reach her eyes. Noah was looking away from the camera. Only Lily seemed genuinely happy, probably because they'd ordered her favorite dessert. His children were already learning to perform happiness for their mother's social media audience. "When is the press conference?" James asked, his voice cold. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., Claire replied. "We've already sent invitations to every major financial news outlet. It's going to be huge." "Good," James said. "Make sure someone records Rachel's reaction when she finds out. I want to see her face when she realizes what she threw away." Claire hesitated. "Mr. Crawford, if I may, revenge isn't going to bring you peace." "This isn't about revenge," James said, though they both knew that was partially a lie. "This is about my children knowing the truth. Rachel has spent 3 days telling everyone, including Emma, Noah, and Lily, that their father is worthless, that Devin is better, that money equals value. Tomorrow they're going to learn that their father could have bought and sold Devin's entire car dealership chain without blinking. They're going to learn that he chose them, chose authenticity, chose love over billions. And they're going to have to reconcile what that means." That night, James couldn't sleep. He wandered the penthouse, past the leather furniture and marble countertops that were already starting to feel normal again. How quickly humans adapted to comfort, he thought bitterly. 15 years of living modestly, and already his body was remembering what luxury felt like. He found himself in front of a mirror, studying his reflection. The haircut made him look sharper, more defined. The expensive pajamas Margaret had insisted he needed fit perfectly. Even the way he stood had started to shift. Shoulders back, chin up, the unconscious posture of someone who'd been raised to command rooms. James Crawford, the construction worker, was disappearing, and James Theodore Crawford III was emerging like a butterfly from a cocoon he'd deliberately built. A memory surfaced. His mother, Catherine Crawford, sitting beside his bed when he was 8 years old, recovering from appendicitis. She'd been the warmth in a cold household, the one who'd read him stories and encouraged his dreams of designing buildings that could withstand earthquakes and house families safely. She died when he was 19, cancer taking her swiftly and brutally, and James had always believed she would have supported his decision to leave. "What would you think of all this, Mom?" he whispered to his reflection. "Did I honor you by walking away, or did I waste the legacy you and Dad built?" The reflection had no answers, but James imagined he could hear his mother's gentle voice. "The measure of a man isn't his bank account, sweetheart. It's what he does when everything is taken from him. That's when you see who someone really is." Tomorrow, the world would see who James Theodore Crawford III really was. And 3 days from now, when the custody battle began, Rachel would learn that divorcing a billionaire was very different from divorcing a construction worker. The press conference room at the Grand Continental Hotel buzzed with confused energy as financial journalists, business reporters, and curious onlookers filed in, wondering why they'd been summoned on such short notice for a historic announcement regarding Crawford Global Enterprises. The company's stock had been volatile for months, plagued by rumors of internal strife and leadership vacuum after Theodore Crawford II's death. Wall Street was hungry for answers. James stood backstage wearing a Tom Ford suit that cost more than 3 months of his construction salary, his heart hammering against his ribs. Margaret stood beside him, reviewing notes on her phone with the calm of someone who'd orchestrated corporate takeovers and billion-dollar deals for 4 decades. 5 minutes, Mr. Crawford, Claire said, her headset crackling with communication from the production team. The major networks are carrying this live. CNN, CNBC, Fox Business, Bloomberg. Your story is already trending on social media based on the teasers we released. Those teasers had been deliberately cryptic. The Crawford heir lives, a 15-year secret revealed. The speculation had been wild. Some theorized James had been in witness protection. Others suggested he'd been in a coma. A few conspiracy theorists had proposed everything from alien abduction to a secret government mission. None of them had guessed the truth. Has anyone contacted Rachel yet? James asked, knowing the answer would be no. Margaret's team had been meticulous about timing. Her phone has been ringing for the past hour, Margaret said with a slight smile. Friends sending her the news alerts, asking if she knows anything. According to our surveillance team, she's been ignoring calls and texts, probably thinking it's some kind of scam or mistaken identity. Devin left for work at his dealership at 8 a.m. The triplets are at school. James had insisted on that detail. Whatever happened today, he didn't want his children finding out via social media or playground gossip. Margaret had already arranged for a child psychologist to be on standby, someone who specialized in helping children process complex family revelations. After the press conference, before Rachel could spin the narrative, James would go to the school and tell Emma, Noah, and Lily the truth himself. 2 minutes, Claire said. Margaret placed a hand on James's shoulder, her gray eyes intense. Once you walk through that door, everything changes. Your privacy ends. Your life becomes public property. The Crawford name comes with expectations, obligations, and a level of scrutiny most people can't imagine. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? James thought about his children's faces in that restaurant photo. About Rachel's caption celebrating her new beginning with Devin. About 15 years of living authentically, only to be discarded the moment someone shinier came along. About his mother's voice telling him that character is revealed in crisis. I want my children back, James said simply. I want them to know who their father is, and I want the resources to fight for them. Everything else is secondary. Margaret nodded, satisfied. Then let's remind the world that the Crawford legacy isn't dead. It was just sleeping. The stage lights were blinding as James walked to the podium, camera flashes erupting like fireworks. He could hear the confused murmurs rippling through the crowd. Nobody here recognized him, which was exactly the point. He'd been so successfully erased from public consciousness that even seasoned financial reporters who'd covered the Crawford family for years had no idea what Theodore Crawford II's son looked like as a grown man. Margaret approached a separate microphone, her voice cutting through the noise with authoritative clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on such short notice. 15 years ago, the business world mourned the tragic loss of James Theodore Crawford III, heir to Crawford Global Enterprises, in a hiking accident. Today, I'm here to tell you that those reports were premature. The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions simultaneously. Cameras swiveled. Producers screamed into headsets. Margaret raised a hand for silence, and gradually, the chaos subsided into tense anticipation. 15 years ago, at the age of 23, James Crawford made a choice that many of you will struggle to understand. Faced with an arranged marriage and a future dictated entirely by corporate and social obligations, he chose to walk away. With my assistance, he staged his disappearance and embarked on an experiment that few people of his wealth and status would ever dare to attempt. He wanted to discover if genuine human connection, authentic love, and honest living were possible when stripped of the influence of his family name and fortune. Margaret paused, letting this sink in. James watched the faces in the crowd shift from confusion to comprehension to disbelief. For 15 years, Margaret continued, James Crawford has lived as an ordinary American citizen. He worked construction. He paid rent. He struggled with bills and budgets. He met a woman, fell in love, got married, and had children, all without revealing his true identity or accessing a single dollar of his inheritance. He lived the life many of you in this room live, and he did it not out of necessity, but out of a profound desire to experience humanity unfiltered by wealth. Now she stepped back, gesturing to James. And today, circumstances have brought him back. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the man you thought was dead, James Theodore Crawford III, majority shareholder of Crawford Global Enterprises, heir to a personal fortune currently valued at $9.2 billion, and, as of this morning, the new chairman and CEO of one of America's most influential infrastructure companies. The explosion of noise was deafening. James stepped to the microphone, his hands surprisingly steady, and waited for silence. When the room finally quieted enough for him to be heard, he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of 15 years of hidden truth. My name is James Crawford, and everything Margaret just told you is accurate. For the past 15 years, I've lived in Ohio under a different identity. I worked construction, earning $45,000 a year. I met my ex-wife, Rachel, at a community center where I was volunteering. We dated, fell in love, and got married in a small ceremony that cost less than $3,000. We had 3 children together, triplets named Emma, Noah, and Lily, who are currently 7 years old. He could see the journalists frantically typing, their fingers flying across keyboards. This was the story of the decade, possibly the century. Billionaire lives as working-class man for 15 years. The angles were endless. 3 days ago, James continued, his voice harder now, my wife divorced me. She'd been having an affair with a man I considered my best friend, someone who had been part of our lives for years. She chose to leave me because, in her words, I was a failure who couldn't provide adequately for our children. She told me our triplets deserved a father who could give them the life they warranted. Yesterday, she married her new partner and posted on social media about finding real love and real partnership with someone who knew their worth. The room had gone completely silent now. This wasn't just a business story anymore. This was human drama on an epic scale. Rachel had no idea who I really was, James said, his eyes finding the cameras that were broadcasting this moment to millions. I never told her about my background, my family, or my fortune. I wanted to know if she could love me for who I was as a person, not what I represented as an heir. For 12 years, I thought I had my answer. Apparently, I was wrong. He let that statement hang in the air before continuing. I'm here today for 3 reasons. First, to formally claim my position at Crawford Global and begin the work of stabilizing and growing a company that has been rudderless for too long. Second, to reclaim my legal identity and all the rights and responsibilities that come with it. And third, to begin a custody battle for my 3 children, who deserve to know that their father isn't a failure. He was simply a man trying to discover what really mattered in life. A reporter shouted over the noise, "Mr. Crawford, do you regret your decision? Was it worth it?" James considered the question carefully. I regret that my experiment in authenticity ultimately failed. I regret that the woman I loved, the woman I chose over billions of dollars and a family legacy, couldn't see past financial status to the man I actually was. But I don't regret trying. I learned more about human nature, about myself, and about what truly matters in these 15 years than I ever would have learned in boardrooms and country clubs. My children grew up in a home filled with love, even if it lacked luxury. They learned to appreciate simple things. They learned that happiness doesn't come from a bank account. Those are lessons they'll carry forever, regardless of what happens next. Another reporter, "What about your father? Theodore Crawford died 18 months ago thinking you were dead. Don't you feel guilty?" The question hit harder than James expected, but he kept his composure. My father and I had fundamental disagreements about what kind of life I should live. He wanted me to be a symbol, a chess piece in corporate strategies. I wanted to be a person. Could we have reconciled? Perhaps. I'll carry that regret for the rest of my life. But I also know that my mother, Catherine Crawford, would have understood. She always told me that integrity and authenticity were worth more than any fortune. I tried to honor her memory by living accordingly. Margaret stepped forward again. We'll be taking questions for the next 20 minutes, but please understand that Mr. Crawford has personal matters to attend to, specifically speaking with his children about this revelation. The full details of Crawford Global's transition plan will be released in a formal statement this afternoon. The questions came rapid fire. How would he prove his identity? DNA tests were already scheduled. What about the death certificate? It would be formally vacated. How would this affect Crawford Global's stock? Margaret's team projected an immediate surge given the restored heir's return and the public relations goldmine of his story. What were his plans for the company? Modernization, expansion, and a new focus on affordable housing, a passion project inspired by his years living in working-class neighborhoods. But the question everyone really wanted answered came from a young reporter in the back. Mr. Crawford, what do you want to say to your ex-wife, who's presumably watching this right now? James looked directly into the main camera, knowing Rachel would see this, knowing Devin would see this, knowing everyone in their social circle who'd pitied poor Rachel for being stuck with a struggling construction worker would see this. He let a long moment of silence stretch out, building tension. Rachel, he said finally, his voice steady and cold, you told me our children deserved a father who knew their worth. You were absolutely right. They do deserve that father. And now they'll have him, the real him, not the disguise I wore, but the man I've always been. As for you, I spent 15 years and $9 billion trying to find authentic love. I thought I'd found it with you. I was wrong about you, but I wasn't wrong about the goal. Somewhere out there is a woman who would have chosen me even as a construction worker, who would have seen past financial struggles to the person underneath. That's the woman who deserves everything I am and everything I have. You've already made your choice. Now you get to live with it. The room erupted again, journalists sensing the epic nature of what they'd just witnessed. Margaret smoothly ended the press conference and James was ushered backstage through a side exit, leaving behind a room full of reporters already composing the stories that would dominate every news cycle for weeks. In the car riding to his children's school, James checked his phone. It had exploded with notifications, messages from numbers he didn't recognize, friend requests from people he'd never met, news alerts with headlines that ranged from sympathetic, billionaire's heartbreaking quest for real love, to salacious, scorned heir reveals ex-wife's gold-digging ways. His personal favorite was from a gossip site, from construction worker to billionaire CEO, the ultimate revenge transformation. But it was the text from Michael Chen, his former construction coworker, that made James's throat tight. Just watch the press conference. You're still the same guy who helped me fix my truck in the rain and bought pizza for the crew with your own money when the company forgot our lunch order. Don't let them change who you really are. Margaret sat beside him, already fielding calls from board members, legal advisors, and Crawford Global executives, who were both relieved and anxious about the heir's dramatic return. The custody lawyers are ready, she said between calls. With your resources and Rachel's provable infidelity, we're confident about the outcome. But Mr. Crawford, you need to prepare yourself for what this will do to your children. They're about to be thrust into a media circus. I know, James said quietly, watching the city pass by through tinted windows. But they were already being used as props in Rachel's social media narrative. At least this way, they'll know the truth. They'll understand that their father didn't abandon them or fail them. He fought for something he believed in, even when that fight cost him everything. The car pulled up to Riverside Elementary School, where Emma, Noah, and Lily were in their second-grade classroom, probably focused on spelling words or math problems, completely unaware that their entire world was about to shift on its axis. James had called ahead, arranging with the principal to pull the triplets from class under the guise of a family emergency. It wasn't exactly a lie. As James walked through the familiar hallways, he'd volunteered here dozens of times helping with book fairs and field day events. Teachers and staff did double takes, some recognizing him from the press conference that was now playing on every television in the teacher's lounge. The whispers followed him like a wake, but he kept his focus on the conference room where Margaret had arranged for the family meeting. The door opened, and his 3 children looked up from the coloring books a kind administrative assistant had provided to keep them occupied. For a moment, they just stared at him, confused by his fancy suit and strange energy. Then Emma's face crumpled, and she launched herself at him, crying, "Daddy, Mommy said we might not see you for a while because of the divorce. I missed you so much." Noah and Lily were right behind her, and James sank to his knees, gathering all 3 into his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of their strawberry shampoo and the faint smell of cafeteria pizza from lunch. This was what mattered. Not the billions, not the company, not the revenge he just unleashed on Rachel and Devin. These three perfect souls who shared his DNA and his heart. "I missed you too, babies," James whispered, his voice breaking. "I missed you so much. And I need to tell you something very important. Something that's going to sound really, really strange." He pulled back enough to look at their faces. Emma with Rachel's green eyes and his brown hair. Noah with his blue eyes and Rachel's blonde hair. Lily with her fierce expression and the stubborn Crawford chin. The child psychologist Margaret had hired, Dr. Sarah Martinez, sat quietly in the corner, ready to intervene if needed. "You know how sometimes in movies," James began carefully, "there are princes who pretend to be regular people because they want to find friends who like them for who they are? Not because they're rich?" Three small heads nodded, eyes wide with curiosity. "Well, Daddy kind of did something like that. A long, long time ago, before I met Mommy, I was born into a family with a lot of money. So much money that people treated me differently because of it. They wanted to be my friend because of the money, not because of who I was. That made me really sad, so I decided to pretend I didn't have that money anymore. I wanted to meet people who would like me just for being me." "Like a secret identity?" Noah asked, his analytical mind already trying to process this information. "Like Spider-Man." "Exactly like Spider-Man," James said, grateful for the comparison. "I had a secret identity, and when I met your mommy, I was using that secret identity. She didn't know about the money. She just knew me as Daddy who worked construction and made pancakes on Saturday." "So, you have money?" Lily asked, her brow furrowed. "Like, enough money to buy stuff?" "A lot of money, sweetheart. Enough to buy almost anything." Emma's tears had stopped, replaced by confusion. "But you always said we couldn't afford things. You said we had to save our allowance. Was that a lie?" This was the hard part, the part that could damage their trust forever if he didn't navigate it carefully. James took a deep breath. "I could have afforded those things, but I wanted you three to learn something important. I wanted you to learn that happiness doesn't come from having lots of stuff. I wanted you to learn to appreciate things, to work for what you want, to understand that the most important things in life, like family and love and being kind, those things don't cost any money at all. But we could have had a bigger house," Noah said, his voice small. "Mommy was always sad about our house." James's heart clenched. "I know, buddy. And that's complicated. Mommy didn't know about the money, so she thought I couldn't give you guys more because I wasn't trying hard enough. But the truth is, I could have given you a mansion and fancy cars and any toy you ever wanted. I chose not to because I wanted you to grow up normal. I wanted you to have friends who liked you for you, not because you had cool stuff. I wanted you to learn that being rich doesn't make you a good person." "Are we rich now?" Lily asked, ever practical. "We have access to a lot of money now, yes. But more importantly, you're going to learn something about your daddy that Mommy didn't know. I'm not just a construction worker. I'm the owner of a very big company, and our family name is kind of famous in the business world." "What's the company called?" Emma asked. "Crawford Global Enterprises. And your full names aren't just Emma, Noah, and Lily. You're Emma Catherine Crawford, Noah Theodore Crawford, and Lily Margaret Crawford. You're part of a family that's been building important things in America for over 100 years. The children exchanged glances, processing this information in their 7-year-old brains. Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly, ready to step in if they showed signs of distress, but so far they were handling it remarkably well. "Does Mommy know?" Noah asked quietly. "She's finding out right now," James said. "There was a big meeting this morning where I told a lot of people the truth about who I am. It's on TV and the internet. By now, Mommy has probably seen it." "Is she going to be mad?" Emma asked, worry creasing her forehead. James chose his words carefully. "Mommy's going to have a lot of feelings about this. But here's what I want you three to understand. Daddy loves you more than anything in the world. More than money, more than companies, more than anything. I lived as a regular person for 15 years because I was trying to find something real and honest. I thought I found it with Mommy. But sometimes grown-ups make mistakes about each other. That's why Mommy and I got divorced. Is it because she liked Devin more? Lily asked bluntly. James winced. How much did Mommy tell you about Devin? She said he was going to be our new daddy because he could take better care of us than you could, Noah said, his voice matter-of-fact but his eyes betraying hurt. She said you were… What was the word, Emma? Mediocre, Emma supplied quietly. She told Grandma Carol on the phone that you were mediocre and that Devin was successful. Rage flared in James's chest, not just at Rachel, but at himself for not being there to defend against these poisonous seeds she'd been planting in his children's minds. But he kept his voice calm. Well, I have something important to tell you about that. Mediocre means average, ordinary, not special. And it's true that when I was pretending to be a regular construction worker, I didn't make as much money as Devin. But kids, money doesn't measure how much someone loves you or how good a person is. Devin has money from his family's car business. That doesn't make him a better person. And now that you know the truth, you'll understand that I had much more money than Devin the whole time. I just chose not to use it because I was trying to teach you something important. What were you trying to teach us? Emma asked. James pulled them close again. That the best things in life aren't things at all. That you can be happy making pillow forts and playing board games. That family dinners around a small table are more valuable than fancy restaurants. That a dad who spends time with you and listens to your problems and helps with your homework is worth more than a dad who just buys you stuff. I wanted you to grow up knowing how to be good people, not just rich people. Are you going to buy us lots of stuff now? Lily asked hopefully. James laughed despite the tension. We're going to have to figure out what that looks like together. But I promise you, even though things are going to change, the important things won't. I'm still going to make you pancakes on Saturday. I'm still going to help with your homework. I'm still going to read you stories at bedtime. The only difference is that now you'll know the whole truth about who your daddy is. Will we still see Mommy? Noah asked, the question James had been dreading. Of course you'll still see Mommy. She's your mother and she loves you very much. But there might be some changes about where you live and how much time you spend with each of us. Daddy's going to be talking to some lawyers about making sure you're taken care of the right way. Do we have to live with Devin? Emma asked, her voice small. James met Dr. Martinez's eyes and she gave a small nod of encouragement. I'm going to try very hard to make sure you live with me most of the time, James said honestly. Devin isn't your father, and he doesn't get to decide what happens to you. But this is going to be decided by judges and lawyers, people whose job it is to figure out what's best for kids. They're going to want to make sure you're safe and happy. Will we be on TV? Noah asked, and James could see the analytical wheels turning in his son's mind. If you're famous now, and we're your kids, are we going to be famous? Probably a little bit for a while, James admitted. A lot of people are interested in our story because it's unusual. But we're going to have security guards and lawyers who make sure nobody bothers you or makes you feel unsafe. And Dr. Martinez here, he gestured to the psychologist, is going to help us all talk about our feelings and make sure you're okay with all these changes. They talked for another hour with Dr. Martinez gently interjecting questions to gauge the children's emotional state and help them process the avalanche of information. By the end, Emma was sitting in James's lap, exhausted. Noah had 1,000 more questions that James promised to answer over time, and Lily had declared that she was glad her daddy was secretly rich because now maybe they could get a dog, which made everyone laugh despite the gravity of everything else. As James was preparing to leave, Margaret had arranged for a secure vehicle to take the children to a family suite at the Meridian Hotel rather than back to Rachel's house. His phone rang. It was a number he recognized but hadn't called in 3 days. Rachel. He put the call on speaker in front of Dr. Martinez, who nodded approval. Rachel's voice came through, high-pitched and desperate in a way James had never heard before. James, please tell me this is some kind of joke. Please tell me you didn't just go on national television and… It's not a joke, Rachel. Everything you saw was true. You're a billionaire? You've been a billionaire this whole time? While I was clipping coupons and buying clearance clothes for the kids, you had billions of dollars? Yes. The line went silent for a long moment. Then, why? Why would you do this to me? Do you have any idea how humiliated I am right now? Everyone is calling me, texting me, asking if I knew, asking how I could divorce a billionaire for a car dealer. My mother won't stop crying. Devon's family is... Stop, James said, his voice hard. You want to talk about humiliation? You had an affair with my best friend. You told our children I was mediocre and that Devon could take better care of them than their own father. You posted on social media about finding real love with someone who knew your worth, implying that I didn't. You divorced me 3 days ago, Rachel. 3 days. And you've already poisoned our children against me. So forgive me if I don't particularly care about your humiliation. You lied to me, Rachel shouted, and he could hear she was crying. Our entire marriage was based on a lie. You let me struggle and stress about money when you could have fixed everything with a phone call. What kind of monster does that? The kind who wanted to know if you'd love him without the money, James said quietly. And I got my answer, didn't I? The moment someone with more visible wealth showed up, you left. You didn't just leave, you mocked me, degraded me, told me and our children that I wasn't good enough. Well, Rachel, now you know the truth. I was always good enough. I was always more than enough. You just couldn't see it because you were too focused on what you didn't have instead of what you did. I want to see my children, Rachel said, her voice breaking. You can't keep them from me. I'm not keeping them from you, but they're staying with me tonight while they process all of this. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a child psychologist, is here to help them. Tomorrow we'll start working out a schedule. But Rachel, understand this. The custody arrangement you thought you'd secured with Devon's money and your lawyers? That's done. I have the resources now to fight you properly, and I will. The courts are going to hear about your affair, about the things you said to our children about their father, about everything, and they're going to decide what's actually best for Emma, Noah, and Lily, not what's convenient for you and your new husband. Devon's voice suddenly came through the speaker, angry and defensive. This is insane, James. You can't just swoop in with your money and take these kids from their mother. They need stability, not to be dragged into your billionaire drama. James laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. Devon, you stood in my living room 3 days ago and told me I was a failure. You said my children deserved a father who could actually provide for them. You implied that your car dealership money made you superior to me. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to step back from my children's lives because you are not their father and you never will be. Rachel made her choice when she married you, and now she gets to live with the consequences. But Emma, Noah, and Lily, they're innocent in all of this, and I will move heaven and earth to make sure they're protected and loved and raised with the values I wanted them to have. Which, by the way, you tried to destroy by teaching them that money equals worth. You're insane, Devon spat. This whole elaborate charade. Living like a poor person for years. You're mentally unstable. That's an interesting accusation from the man who seduced his best friend's wife, James replied coldly. But feel free to make that argument in court. I'm sure the judge will be fascinated by your psychological assessment. In the meantime, stay away from my children unless Rachel has official custody time, which I'm going to ensure is supervised until we can verify that you're not poisoning them against their father any further. He hung up before either of them could respond, his hands shaking slightly with adrenaline. Dr. Martinez gave him an approving nod. That was handled very well, Mr. Crawford. You set clear boundaries while making it clear that the children's well-being is your priority. James looked at his 3 children, who had heard at least part of that conversation. That was Mommy and Devon. They're upset right now, and they're going to be upset for a while. But I want you 3 to know something very important. None of this is your fault. The problems between Mommy and me, the secrets I kept, the choices we both made, none of that has anything to do with you. You are perfect, and you are loved, and we're going to figure this out together. Emma hugged him tightly. I'm glad you told us the truth, Daddy, even if it's weird and confusing. Me too, Princess, James whispered. Me too. The Crawford Global Enterprises headquarters occupied 47 floors of a gleaming tower in downtown Manhattan, and James had forgotten how overwhelming the architecture of power could be. The building had been designed by his great-grandfather in the 1950s and renovated extensively in the early 2000s by his father, and walking through the marble lobby felt like stepping into a cathedral of capitalism. Every surface gleamed. Every employee who passed wore clothes that cost more than James's monthly construction salary used to be, and everyone stopped and stared as he crossed toward the executive elevators. Margaret had prepared the transition meticulously. A board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., where James would formally assume the role of chairman and CEO. Legal documents had been filed, identity verifications had been processed, and the corporate lawyers had worked around the clock to ensure that James's return was legally airtight. The stock had indeed surged after the press conference, adding another $400 million to James's personal net worth in a single day as investors celebrated the return of the Crawford heir. But standing in the elevator as it climbed toward the top floor, James felt a disconnect between the man he'd been yesterday and the man he was supposed to become today. His hands still bore calluses from construction work, his body still ached from years of physical labor, and his heart was still raw from Rachel's betrayal and the fear that he might lose his children. The executive floor was exactly as he remembered it from brief visits during his childhood. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Manhattan that made the city look like a toy model. Conference rooms with glass walls and technology that made million-dollar deals feel effortless. Offices that spoke of power and influence accumulated over generations. His father's office, now his office, occupied the corner with the best view, looking out over Central Park to the north and the Hudson River to the west. Margaret was waiting inside, along with Robert Harrison, Crawford Global's CFO, and Patricia Chen, the interim CEO who'd been holding the company together during the leadership vacuum. Both looked at James with a mixture of curiosity and assessment, trying to reconcile the legendary heir with the man in front of them who'd spent 15 years framing houses. "Mr. Crawford," Patricia said, extending her hand. She was in her late 50s, with steel gray hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd fought her way to the top of a male-dominated industry. "Welcome home. Your father would be, well, I'm not sure what he'd be, honestly. Furious? Proud? Probably both." James shook her hand, appreciating the directness. "I appreciate you keeping the company stable in my absence, Miss Chen. Margaret's briefings made it clear that without your leadership, Crawford Global would have been vulnerable to the takeover attempts." "The Meridian Group tried 3 times, Robert added. He was younger, maybe 40, with the eager energy of someone who'd climbed fast and wanted to keep climbing. They assumed the heir was dead and the board was fractured. Patricia held them off, but it's been expensive. The defensive strategies cost us nearly $200 million in the past year alone." "That ends today," James said, moving behind the massive mahogany desk that had belonged to his father. Sitting in this chair felt surreal, like wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. "As of this afternoon, I want a full accounting of all ongoing projects, partnerships, acquisitions, and potential vulnerabilities. I've been away from the corporate world for 15 years, which means I have a lot of catching up to do. But I'm not interested in simply maintaining the status quo. Crawford Global needs to evolve." Patricia and Robert exchanged glances. "Evolve how?" Patricia asked carefully. James pulled up the notes he'd been making for the past 3 days, ideas that had been percolating during his years of working construction and seeing firsthand how regular Americans lived. "The infrastructure sector is about to undergo a revolution. Climate change is forcing us to rethink how we build everything from highways to power grids. Housing affordability is a crisis that's only getting worse, and the technology exists to build better, more sustainable, more affordable structures, but companies like ours have been slow to adapt because there's more profit in the old ways." He looked up at them. "I want Crawford Global to lead the affordable housing revolution. I want us to develop new construction techniques that can build quality homes for half the current cost. I want us to invest in sustainable materials and green infrastructure. And I want us to partner with communities rather than exploiting them." Robert looked skeptical. "With all due respect, sir, that sounds very noble, but our shareholders expect returns. Affordable housing typically means lower profit margins." "In the short term, yes," James agreed, "but in the long term, we're positioning ourselves to dominate a market that's about to explode. Millennials and Gen Z are locked out of home ownership because housing costs have outpaced wages for decades. The first major corporation that solves that problem is going to be a hero to an entire generation of consumers. That kind of brand loyalty and market position, that's worth more than quarterly profit margins. Patricia smiled slowly. You've been thinking about this for a while. I've spent 15 years building houses and living in communities where people work 3 jobs and still can't afford decent shelter for their families, James said. I've seen the problem from the inside. Now I have the resources to actually solve it. That's not just good business, it's the right thing to do. The board meeting started at 2 p.m. sharp, and James walked into the conference room to face 17 men and women who represented some of the most powerful families and investment firms in America. Many of them had known his father, some had known his grandfather. All of them had opinions about the prodigal heir who'd staged his own death and abandoned his responsibilities. He stood at the head of the table, and for a long moment, just let them look at him. Let them see that he wasn't Theodore Crawford II's carefully groomed puppet. Let them see the calluses on his hands and the confidence in his eyes that came from earning respect rather than inheriting it. Ladies and gentlemen, James began, I'm not my father. I'm not going to pretend to be, and I'm not going to apologize for the choices I made 15 years ago. I walked away because I refused to be a chess piece in corporate strategies and social climbing. I wanted to discover what kind of man I could be when stripped of privilege and expectation. I learned more in those 15 years than I ever would have learned in these boardrooms. One of the older board members, Marcus Wellington, interrupted. That's a lovely speech, young man, but frankly, we don't care about your personal journey. Crawford Global has been rudderless for 18 months. We've lost market share. Our stock was volatile, and you show up after playing working class hero for 15 years and expect us to just hand you control? James smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd been expecting this challenge. Mr. Wellington, you and my father went to Yale together. You were appointed to this board 40 years ago as a favor to your family's investment in our telecommunications division. In that time, you've opposed every major innovation this company has attempted, from our expansion into renewable energy infrastructure to our partnerships with tech companies for smart city development. You represent old money and old thinking, and frankly, you're exactly the kind of obstacle Crawford Global needs to remove if we're going to remain relevant in the 21st century. The room went dead silent. Margaret, sitting to James's right, had a tiny smile playing at her lips. Wellington's face turned red. How dare you? I dare because I'm the majority shareholder, James said calmly. I control 51% of Crawford Global's stock through the family trust that was established by my great-grandfather. That means I can remove any board member I choose. I can restructure this entire operation, and I can implement whatever strategic vision I believe is correct. Now we can do this the easy way, with everyone working together to move this company forward. Or we can do it the hard way, with me systematically replacing everyone who stands in the way of progress. Your choice. Another board member, Sandra Liu, spoke up. She was younger, maybe 50, and James remembered Margaret mentioning she'd been appointed 3 years ago to diversify the board. Mr. Crawford, what exactly is your strategic vision? What do you plan to do with Crawford Global? James outlined his plan for the next hour. The shift toward affordable housing, the investment in sustainable materials, the partnerships with community organizations, the new training programs for construction workers. He showed them market research he'd had Margaret's team compile, demonstrating the massive untapped demand for quality affordable housing. He presented financial models showing that while profit margins would be lower initially, the volume and brand positioning would ultimately generate greater returns. By the end of his presentation, half the board looked intrigued. A quarter looked skeptical but open to discussion, and the remaining quarter, Wellington among them, looked furious. This is social work, not business, Wellington protested. Your father built this company on profitable government contracts and luxury developments. You're proposing we become some kind of nonprofit housing charity. No, James corrected. I'm proposing we become the company that solves one of America's biggest problems while generating sustainable profit and building brand loyalty with the next 2 generations of consumers. That's not charity, that's smart business. But if you can't see that, Mr. Wellington, then perhaps it's time you considered retirement. The vote to approve James as chairman and CEO was 15-2. Wellington and one of his allies voted against, but they were soundly outnumbered. As the meeting adjourned, several board members approached James to discuss the affordable housing initiative in more detail, their business instincts overriding their initial skepticism. Margaret pulled him aside as the room cleared. "That was a masterful performance. Your father would have been proud, even if he'd never admit it." "My father would have hated everything I just proposed," James said wearily. "He believed business existed to maximize profit for shareholders. Period. I'm proposing something messier, that business can and should serve a social purpose while still being profitable." "Your mother would have loved it," Margaret said softly, and James felt that familiar ache. Catherine Crawford had been a passionate advocate for affordable housing and urban development in her lifetime, serving on nonprofit boards and pushing her husband to consider the social impact of their business decisions. She'd lost most of those arguments, but her influence had shaped James in ways his father never understood. James's phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "News alert. Rachel and Devin gave interview to local TV station. It's not good." He pulled up the video on his tablet. There was Rachel sitting in what looked like Devin's expensive living room, makeup perfect, expression carefully composed into something between victim and wronged woman. Devin sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders in a gesture of support that made James's jaw clench. The interviewer asked Rachel about her reaction to discovering her ex-husband's true identity. Rachel dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Real tears or practiced performance, James couldn't tell, and spoke in a trembling voice. "I feel so betrayed," Rachel said. "James and I were married for 12 years. We had 3 beautiful children together, and the entire time he was lying to me about who he was. I thought we were partners, struggling together to build a life for our family. I thought we were equals. But apparently he was running some kind of social experiment, using me as a test subject to see if I'd love him without his money. That's not..." James started to object to the empty room, but the interview continued. "I made sacrifices," Rachel said, her voice gaining strength. "I worked as a teacher at an underfunded school because we needed my income. I clipped coupons. I bought secondhand clothes for our children. I skipped meals sometimes to make sure they had enough. And all the while, my husband had $9 billion and was just watching me struggle. What kind of person does that to someone they claim to love?" Devin jumped in, his voice full of righteous indignation. "It's psychological abuse, honestly. Rachel has been traumatized by this revelation. To discover that the man you trusted, the father of your children, was essentially playing pretend with your entire life? That's cruel. And now James is using his money to try to take the kids away from Rachel, punishing her for leaving him. It's a classic case of a wealthy, powerful man using his resources to control and manipulate." The interviewer turned to Rachel. "James claimed in his press conference that you divorced him because you thought he was a failure, that you had an affair with Devin because he could provide better for the children. How do you respond to those allegations?" Rachel's expression hardened slightly. "James is rewriting history to make himself look like a victim. The truth is, our marriage had problems long before Devin and I grew close. James was distant, uncommunicative. He seemed content to let our family struggle financially while he pursued some kind of philosophical experiment about authentic living. I tried to make it work, but eventually I had to accept that I deserved a partner who was honest with me and who prioritized our children's well-being over his personal ideology." The video ended, and James sat back, feeling sick. Rachel had just positioned herself as the victim of his deception, completely reframing the narrative. She'd made his quest for authentic love sound like a manipulative game. She'd turned his financial restraint into abuse, and she'd whitewashed her affair with Devin as the natural result of James's emotional unavailability. "She's good," Margaret said, having watched over his shoulder. "She's reframing the entire story in a way that makes you look like the villain. This is going to complicate the custody case." James looked at the view from his father's office, his office now over Central Park. Somewhere in the city, his children were with a nanny Margaret had hired, probably watching cartoons and trying to process everything that had happened. They'd seen him on TV. They'd heard him called a billionaire. They'd been told their entire life was changing. Set up a counter interview, James said quietly. I want to tell my side of the story, but I want to do it right. Not defensive, not attacking Rachel. I want to explain my philosophy, my choices, and most importantly, I want to talk about what kind of father I want to be for my children going forward. Margaret nodded. I'll reach out to the networks. They're all clamoring for an exclusive with you. And Margaret? James turned to face her. I want to establish a trust fund for Emma, Noah, and Lily, something that will give them financial security but requires them to demonstrate work ethic and character before they can access the bulk of it. I don't want my children to grow up as lazy trust fund kids. I want them to understand the value of work, the satisfaction of earning things, the importance of using wealth responsibly. That's very similar to what your mother suggested to your father before you were born, Margaret said with a sad smile. He rejected the idea, said Crawford heirs needed to learn to handle money from childhood. My father was wrong about a lot of things, James said, but I have a chance to do this differently, to raise my children with the values I learned during my 15 years outside this world. That's what matters now. Not revenge against Rachel, not winning some moral victory. I want my kids to grow up as good people who happen to have access to wealth, not wealthy people who happen to be good sometimes. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Emma, sent from the tablet Margaret's team had provided. Daddy, can we really get a dog now? Despite everything, the board meeting, Rachel's interview, the complicated custody battle looming, James smiled. His daughter was focused on what mattered to a 7-year-old, the possibility of finally getting the puppy she'd begged for since she was 4. Yes, princess, he texted back. We can get a dog. The biggest, fluffiest dog you want. Within seconds, his phone exploded with excited messages from all 3 triplets, discussing dog breeds and names and whether they could get 2 dogs instead of 1. For a moment, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and power he'd rejected for 15 years, James felt something that had been missing for days. Pure, uncomplicated joy. This was why he'd come back. Not for revenge, not to prove anything to Rachel or Devon or the world, but to be the father his children deserved, one who could teach them the values he'd learned while living as a working-class man, while also giving them the opportunities that came with being Crawford heirs. The task ahead was daunting, rebuilding Crawford Global, winning custody of his children, navigating media scrutiny, and somehow maintaining his own integrity in a world that rewarded ruthlessness over righteousness. But as he looked out over the city, James felt something he hadn't felt since Rachel left. Purpose. He wasn't James Crawford, the construction worker anymore, but he also wasn't going to become Theodore Crawford III, the man his father had wanted him to be. He was going to forge something new, a synthesis of the lessons learned from both worlds, building a life that honored both his mother's compassion and his father's ambition, proving that wealth and values weren't mutually exclusive. The custody hearing was set for 3 weeks after James's dramatic return to public life, which gave both sides time to prepare their cases and gave the media time to turn the Crawford divorce into the most watched family court drama in recent memory. Margaret had assembled a legal team that looked like the Avengers of family law, specialists in high-net-worth divorces, custody battles involving infidelity, and media management in high-profile cases. Rachel had lawyered up too, hiring Melissa Warren, an attorney known for representing wronged spouses of wealthy men. The narrative Warren was building was clear from her statements to the press. James Crawford had perpetrated a massive fraud on Rachel, denying her informed consent about who she was actually marrying, and now he was using his vast wealth to punish her for leaving him. But in the 3 weeks before the hearing, James had been busy. He'd moved into a sprawling penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, not because he needed the space, but because he needed rooms for each of his children, decorated according to their individual interests. Emma's room was filled with books and art supplies. Noah's room had a telescope by the window and a wall dedicated to maps and science posters. Lily's room featured sports equipment and a collection of superhero merchandise. And yes, they'd gotten a dog, a golden retriever puppy named Maxwell, who bounded through the apartment bringing chaos and joy in equal measure. James had also been methodical about documenting his relationship with his children. Every evening, regardless of how exhausted he was from Crawford Global business, He had video calls with the triplets when they were with Rachel, helping with homework and reading bedtime stories. On his custody days, Rachel had grudgingly agreed to a temporary joint custody arrangement while awaiting the hearing. He took them to museums, parks, and restaurants, but also made sure to maintain their old routines. Saturday pancakes, Sunday movie nights, evening walks around the neighborhood. He'd also enrolled them in sessions with Dr. Martinez, who was helping them process the massive changes in their lives. According to her reports, the children were adapting remarkably well. They were excited about their new rooms, thrilled about Maxwell, and enjoying the novelty of having access to resources they'd never had before. But they also missed the simplicity of their old life, and they were confused by the tension between their parents. The most heartbreaking detail in Dr. Martinez's reports was that all three children felt guilty about being happy with the new circumstances, as if enjoying their bigger rooms and the puppy meant they were betraying their mother. Rachel, according to the children, had been crying a lot and making comments about how daddy's money is changing everything, and how they needed to remember who really loves you, not just who can buy you things. James had wanted to immediately file for full custody based on that emotional manipulation, but Margaret had counseled patience. Let Rachel dig her own hole, she'd advised. Document everything, but don't escalate. The judge is going to see through her tactics if she keeps this up. The interview James had done with 60 Minutes had aired 2 weeks after his revelation, and it had shifted public opinion significantly. He'd sat down with the interviewer, not in his Crawford Global office or penthouse apartment, but in a modest rental space similar to where he'd lived with Rachel, a deliberate choice to ground his story. "I know how this looks," James had said to the camera. "Billionaire pretends to be poor, marries unsuspecting woman, watches her struggle. It sounds cruel when you phrase it that way, but that's not what happened, or at least that's not what I intended." The interviewer had pressed him. "Then what did you intend, Mr. Crawford?" James had thought carefully before answering. "I wanted to know if love could exist without the corruption of wealth. I grew up in a world where every relationship was transactional. People were friends with me because of my last name. Women dated me because of my family's money. Business partners wanted access to my connections. Everything was contaminated by wealth. So at 23, I made what seemed like a rational decision. I'd remove the wealth from the equation and see what remained." "But you didn't just remove yourself from wealth," the interviewer had pointed out. "You married Rachel under false pretenses. She thought she was marrying a construction worker. She made life decisions based on that assumption." "I know," James had said, and his remorse had been genuine. "And I understand why Rachel feels betrayed. If I could go back and do it differently, I don't know. Maybe I would have told her the truth earlier. Maybe I would have revealed my identity after a few years, once I was confident in her love. But I also know that the moment I told her, everything would have changed. She would have started seeing me as James Crawford, the billionaire, instead of James the man. And I didn't want that. I wanted her to love me for who I was, not what I had." "And when she chose to divorce you?" the interviewer had asked. "When she chose Devin Walters, a man with visible wealth over you, the man she thought had no wealth. What did that tell you?" James's expression had been pained. "It told me that my experiment failed, that maybe my father was right, that in the real world, love and money are inextricably linked, that people judge worthiness by financial status whether they admit it or not." Rachel looked at our struggling life and concluded I wasn't enough. She looked at Devin's success and saw a better future. I can't entirely blame her for that. Raising 3 children on my construction salary was hard. She was stressed. She was tired. And Devin offered her an easier path. "But you could have made it easier at any time," the interviewer had pressed. "You could have accessed your wealth, given your family a better life, relieved Rachel's stress. Instead, you watched her struggle. Some people are calling that abusive." And maybe they're right, James had admitted, and this moment of vulnerability had been what shifted public opinion. Maybe in my determination to test the authenticity of our relationship, I caused unnecessary suffering. That's something I have to live with. But I want to be clear, I never denied my children necessities. They had food, clothing, health care, education. We lived modestly, but we weren't in poverty. I wanted them to learn values that I believed were important: appreciation, work ethic, the joy of simple things. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have given them access to wealth earlier. But my intentions were never to harm them or Rachel. I was trying to give them something I never had, a normal childhood. The interview had been watched by 15 million people and sparked countless think pieces about wealth, authenticity, and the ethics of James's social experiment. Opinion was divided. Some people sympathized with him, seeing his quest as a romantic, if misguided attempt to find genuine love. Others saw him as a manipulative rich person who'd used his wife and children as lab rats in a psychological experiment. But the most important audience was the family court judge who would decide custody of Emma Noe and Lily. And as James sat in the courtroom on the day of the hearing, watching Judge Sandra Morrison review the mountains of documentation both sides had submitted, he felt the weight of everything depending on this moment. Rachel sat across the aisle with Devin beside her, both dressed conservatively and projecting an image of stable, loving partnership. Rachel's lawyer, Melissa Warren, had built their case on several pillars. James's deception constituted fraud and emotional abuse. His extreme wealth would expose the children to danger and corrupt their values. His years of absence from the corporate world suggested instability and poor judgment, and his sudden reemergence was traumatizing the children. James's legal team, led by Margaret and a brilliant family lawyer named Thomas Reed, had their own pillars. Rachel's infidelity demonstrated moral unfitness. Her emotional manipulation of the children was documented through therapy notes. James's devotion to his children was evidenced by 15 years of hands-on parenting, and his wealth, far from being a negative, would provide the children with security, opportunities, and the best possible care. Judge Morrison was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with a reputation for being impartial but tough. She'd reviewed all the submissions, interviewed Dr. Martinez, and even briefly spoken with the children in her chambers, with both parents' lawyers present, but not the parents themselves, to minimize pressure on the kids. This is one of the most unusual custody cases I've encountered in 30 years on the bench, Judge Morrison began. We have a father who staged his own death, lived under an assumed identity, married without revealing his true background, and has now returned to claim both his fortune and his children. We have a mother who engaged in an extramarital affair, filed for divorce, and is now arguing that her ex-husband's wealth and deception make him an unfit parent. And caught in the middle are 3 7-year-old children who, by all accounts, love both their parents and are confused by the adult dramas surrounding them. She looked at both parties. Let me be clear about something. I don't care about your wealth, Mr. Crawford. I don't care about your fame or your company or your social experiment. I care about what's best for Emma, Noah, and Lily. Similarly, Ms. Collins. She used Rachel's maiden name, as Rachel had reverted to it after the divorce. I don't care about your feelings of betrayal or your new marriage. I care about your capacity to parent effectively and put your children's needs ahead of your own emotions. The hearing proceeded with testimonies from both sides. Devin took the stand and described his relationship with the children, emphasizing how he'd been a stable presence in their lives and could provide them with consistency. Under cross-examination, Thomas Reed got Devin to admit that his relationship with Rachel had begun while she was still married, and that he'd made disparaging comments about James in front of the children before anyone knew James's true identity. Rachel testified about her years of sacrifice, her stress over finances, and her sense of betrayal upon discovering James's deception. She painted a picture of a man who was essentially a stranger. She'd never really known who James Crawford was, and therefore couldn't trust him to be a good father now. Melissa Warren questioned whether someone capable of maintaining such an elaborate deception for 15 years could be emotionally stable or honest. But then came the children's testimonies, delivered via video recordings of their sessions with Judge Morrison. The judge had asked simple, straightforward questions. Do you feel safe with your father? Do you feel safe with your mother? What do you like about time with each parent? What worries you about each parent? Emma, with her thoughtful nature, had said, I love Mommy, but she cries a lot now and says things about Daddy that make me confused. Daddy seems happier now. He still makes pancakes and helps with my homework, just like before, but he doesn't seem as stressed. I like our new apartment and Maxwell, but I miss our old house sometimes because it felt cozier. Noah, analytical as always, had observed, "I think Daddy kept a secret because he was trying to solve a problem, like a science experiment. I understand that, even though it seems like it didn't work. Mommy's mad at Daddy, which makes sense, but sometimes she asks us questions about whether we like Daddy's money and whether we think money is important, and I don't know how to answer because I think she wants me to say money doesn't matter, but I also like having a bigger room and better toys. It's confusing." Lily, blunt and protective, had said, "Mommy and Devin talk about Daddy when they think we can't hear, and they say mean things. Daddy never says mean things about Mommy. Devin isn't our dad, and I don't want him to pretend he is. I want to live with Daddy because he makes me feel safe, and he doesn't make me feel bad about being happy." The courtroom had been silent as these testimonies played. James saw Rachel wipe tears from her eyes, and he felt a complicated mix of sympathy and frustration. He didn't want his children to hurt Rachel, but he also knew they were simply telling the truth about their experiences. Dr. Martinez testified about the children's psychological state, noting that they were resilient and adaptable, but were being stressed by the conflict between their parents. "What these children need," she said firmly, "is for both parents to put aside their personal grievances and focus on co-parenting effectively. Emma, Noah, and Lily don't need their parents to be friends, but they need their parents to stop using them as weapons or sympathy cards in their adult drama." The final testimony came from James himself. Thomas Reed walked him through his decision to leave his old life, his years with Rachel, and his current intentions. But it was the cross-examination by Melissa Warren that everyone had been waiting for. "Mr. Crawford," Warren began, her voice sharp, "you've testified that you loved Rachel, yet you watched her struggle financially for 12 years. You watched her work long hours as a teacher in an underfunded school. You watched her clip coupons and worry about bills, all while you had access to $9 billion. How was that love?" James took a breath. "I understand how it looks, but our financial situation, while modest, was never desperate. Rachel had wanted to be a teacher from the beginning. It wasn't something I forced her into. Our children had everything they needed, and I believed, perhaps wrongly, that the values we were instilling through modest living were worth more than material comfort. But you didn't give Rachel a choice," Warren pressed. "You didn't say, 'I have money, but I believe we should live modestly.' You lied by omission, letting her believe you were a construction worker who couldn't afford more. That's not a values decision. That's manipulation." "You're right," James said quietly, and the admission seemed to surprise Warren. "I didn't give Rachel informed consent about who she was marrying. I justified it by telling myself I needed to test whether our love was real. But looking back, I see how that violated her autonomy. She deserved to know the truth and make her own choice about whether to stay with me. I took that choice away from her, and for that, I am genuinely sorry." Warren paused, seeming to recalibrate her attack. "If you're so sorry, why are you fighting for custody? Why not let the children stay with their mother, the parent they've known consistently, without the complication of your wealth and fame?" "Because they're my children too," James said, his voice strengthening. "I was there for every milestone, every skinned knee, every school play, every bedtime story. I coached their soccer teams and helped with their homework and taught them to ride bikes. The fact that I was secretly wealthy doesn't erase 15 years of active, engaged fatherhood. And frankly, Ms. Warren, Rachel's decision to divorce me doesn't give her the right to erase me from our children's lives or to paint me as a failure to them. They deserve to know who their father really is, and they deserve to benefit from the opportunities my resources can provide, including but not limited to financial security, excellent education, and the freedom to pursue their passions without the constraints Rachel and I lived under." "But won't your wealth corrupt them?" Warren asked. "Won't they grow up entitled, disconnected from normal people, exactly what you were trying to escape?" "Not if I parent them correctly," James replied. "I learned valuable lessons during my 15 years outside the bubble of wealth. I learned empathy, work ethic, and appreciation for simple joys. I can teach my children those same lessons while also giving them opportunities I didn't have. It's not an either-or proposition. Wealth and values can coexist if you are intentional about it." Judge Morrison called a recess after James's testimony, and for 2 hours both sides waited anxiously. James stood by the courtroom windows, looking out at the city and thinking about his children. Were they at school right now, trying to focus on math problems while their fate was being decided? Were they worried? Did they understand what was happening? When Judge Morrison returned, her expression was unreadable. She asked both parties to stand. "I've reviewed all the evidence, testimonies, and reports in this case," she began, "and I've given considerable thought to what serves the best interests of Emma, Noah, and Lily Crawford. Both parents love these children. That's clear. Both parents have significant strengths and significant flaws. Mr. Crawford's deception was wrong, regardless of his philosophical justifications. Ms. Collins's infidelity and emotional manipulation of the children are concerning, regardless of her feelings of betrayal." She paused. "However, this case isn't about which parent deserves custody as a reward for better behavior. It's about what arrangement will give these 3 children the most stable, nurturing environment going forward. After careful consideration, here is my ruling." James's heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. "Primary physical custody will be granted to Mr. Crawford, with the children residing with him during the school year. Ms. Collins will have custody every other weekend, alternating holidays and 6 weeks during summer break. Both parents will share joint legal custody, meaning major decisions about education, health care, and welfare must be made jointly." Rachel let out a choked sob, and Devin put his arm around her. James felt dizzy with relief and something else, a kind of hollow victory. He'd won, but at what cost to his children's relationship with their mother? "I'm making this decision for several reasons," Judge Morrison continued. "First, Mr. Crawford has demonstrated consistent, hands-on parenting for the children's entire lives. Second, his resources provide stability and opportunities that serve the children's best interests. Third, the therapy reports indicate the children feel emotionally safer with their father, as he has not involved them in adult conflicts. Fourth, Ms. Collins's living situation with Mr. Walters, a man with no legal relationship to the children, but who is attempting to assume a parental role, creates confusion that is not in the children's best interest at this time." She looked directly at Rachel. "Ms. Collins, I want to be clear. This is not a punishment. You are not a bad mother, but you have work to do. The comments you've made to your children about their father, the ways you've sought sympathy from them about adult issues, the subtle pressure you've placed on them to choose sides, these are harmful and they need to stop. I'm ordering you to engage in co-parenting therapy with Mr. Crawford to learn how to communicate effectively about the children without using them as messengers or emotional support." Then she turned to James. "Mr. Crawford, you have greater custody, but that comes with responsibilities. These children need stability and normalcy, not to be thrust into a lifestyle of excessive privilege that disconnects them from the realities most people face. You spoke eloquently about teaching them values alongside providing opportunities. I expect you to follow through on that. Furthermore, you will encourage and support a healthy relationship between the children and their mother. They need Rachel, and you will not poison that relationship regardless of your personal feelings." Finally, she addressed both of them. Emma, Noah, and Lily didn't ask to be born into this complicated situation. They didn't ask for their father to be a secret billionaire or for their parents' marriage to fall apart. But here they are, and they deserve better from both of you. Put aside your egos, your hurt feelings, and your need to be right. Focus on being the parents these 3 children need. Court is adjourned. 6 months after the custody ruling, James sat in his penthouse living room watching his 3 children play with Maxwell. Emma was reading a book while absent-mindedly petting the dog. Noah was building an elaborate structure with Lego. Lily was practicing soccer moves, dribbling a small ball around the furniture. It was a Sunday afternoon, peaceful and ordinary in a way that felt miraculous after the chaos of the past year. Rachel had visited earlier to pick up the kids for her weekend custody time, and the exchange had been cordial if not warm. She and James had been attending co-parenting therapy for the past 5 months, slowly learning how to communicate about schedules, school events, and medical appointments without devolving into accusations. It wasn't easy. Rachel was still angry about the deception, still processing her feelings of betrayal. But she was trying, and so was James. Devin had faded into the background. Rachel had filed for divorce from him after just 4 months of marriage, realizing that she jumped from one relationship to another without processing the end of her marriage to James. According to their therapist, Rachel was now doing individual work to understand her own role in the marriage's failure, her relationship with money and status, and her tendency to seek external validation. Crawford Global was thriving under James's leadership. The Affordable Housing Initiative had launched in 3 cities, with plans to expand to 10 more within 2 years. The media had covered the story extensively. Billionaire who lived as working-class man now building quality affordable homes, and the brand positioning had been brilliant. Crawford Global stock had hit record highs, and James had been featured on the cover of Forbes with the headline, "The Billionaire Who Lived Like Us." But more important than any of that, James had found a kind of peace. He'd integrated the 2 parts of his identity, the man who valued authenticity and simple joys, and the man who had responsibilities to a family legacy and the power to make meaningful change. He still made pancakes for his children on Saturdays. He still helped with homework every evening, but now he could also take them to Broadway shows, enroll them in the best schools, and set up educational trusts that would ensure they'd never struggle financially. Emma, Noah, and Lily were adjusting remarkably well. They'd made friends at their new school, a private institution that emphasized character development alongside academic excellence. They still saw their mother regularly, and while things were sometimes awkward, the children were resilient. Dr. Martinez had noted in her latest report that all 3 were processing the changes in healthy ways, helped by consistent routines, honest communication, and the security of knowing both parents loved them. James had also started dating again, cautiously. He'd met a woman named Victoria, ironically the same name as the woman his father had tried to force him to marry, who ran a nonprofit focused on urban development. She knew exactly who he was from the beginning, but she seemed more interested in his ideas about affordable housing than his bank account. They'd been seeing each other for 2 months, taking things slowly, both of them wary after previous relationship failures. James had no idea if it would work out, but at least this time, everything was honest from the start. His phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Wellington is making noise about the affordable housing margins again. Prepare to defend the vision." James smiled. Some things never changed. Wellington had stayed on the board despite James's initial threats, mostly because other board members had convinced James that having a loyal opposition voice was actually useful for stress testing ideas. Wellington still hated the Affordable Housing Initiative, still thought James was too idealistic, still represented old money and old thinking. But Crawford Global was profitable, growing, and garnering positive attention, which made it hard for Wellington to gain traction for his complaints. "Daddy," Emma looked up from her book. "Can we have mac and cheese for dinner?" "We can have whatever you want, Princess," James said. "Can it be the kind from the box?" Emma asked. "Not the fancy kind from the restaurant. The blue box kind." James laughed. Despite their new circumstances, his children still craved the simple foods from their previous life. Boxed mac and cheese, frozen pizza, PB&J sandwiches. These comfort foods grounded them, reminded them that wealth hadn't fundamentally changed who they were. "Blue box it is," James agreed. Lily looked up from her soccer ball. "And after dinner, can we watch a movie? Like we used to on Sundays?" "Absolutely. What movie?" "Something old," Noah suggested. "From when you were a kid." James thought about that. When he was a kid, he lived in a Manhattan mansion with staff and private screening rooms. His childhood had been full of privilege, but empty of the warmth his children enjoyed. He'd had every toy, every game, every advantage money could buy, but he'd never had what his children had now. Parents who were present, involved, genuinely interested in their lives beyond their social utility. "How about we watch The Sandlot?" James suggested. "It's about kids playing baseball in the summer. It reminds me of the games we used to watch together." The children agreed enthusiastically, and as James headed to the kitchen to prepare their requested blue box mac and cheese, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. He'd given up his identity to find authentic love. He'd found it, or thought he had, only to have it crumble when tested. He'd reclaimed his identity, fought for his children, and rebuilt his life in a new configuration that honored both worlds he'd inhabited. Had it been worth it? The pain, the deception, the complicated fallout? James still wasn't entirely sure. Rachel had been genuinely hurt by his choices. His children had been caught in the middle of adult conflicts they shouldn't have had to navigate. His father had died without knowing his son was alive. Those were real costs, real casualties of his social experiment. But he'd also learned truths that most people of his wealth and status never discovered. He'd learned what it felt like to earn every dollar, to work with his hands, to be judged on his character rather than his name. He'd learned that money didn't equal worth, that simple joys could be more satisfying than expensive pleasures, that authentic connections were possible if you were willing to be vulnerable. And most importantly, he learned how to be a real father, present, engaged, focused on values rather than appearances. Now he had the challenge of teaching those lessons to his children while also giving them access to opportunities that came with wealth. It was a delicate balance, one he wouldn't always get right, but he was trying, consciously and deliberately, to raise Emma, Noah, and Lily to be good humans who happened to have money, rather than rich kids who might occasionally do good things. As he stirred the noodles and listened to his children laugh in the living room, Maxwell barking excitedly, James felt something he'd been chasing for 15 years: contentment. Not the desperate quest for authentic love that had driven him to abandon his identity. Not the hollow satisfaction of wealth and power, but something simpler and more durable. The knowledge that he was living with integrity, parenting with intention, and building a life that honored both the man he'd chosen to become and the legacy he'd been born to inherit. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Rachel Collins speaks out. I'm learning to co-parent with a billionaire. James clicked on it and read the interview Rachel had given to a parenting magazine. She was honest about her struggles, her initial anger, her journey in therapy. But she was also surprisingly fair, acknowledging that James had always been a devoted father, even if his methods had been unconventional. I still think what James did was wrong, Rachel was quoted as saying, but I'm learning that people are complicated. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to solve a problem he saw with how wealth corrupts relationships. He just didn't fully consider how his solution would impact the people around him. We're working on rebuilding trust, not as spouses, but as co-parents. Our children deserve better than to be caught in the middle of our conflicts. The interview ended with Rachel saying something that surprised James. If I'm honest, I learned something from this whole experience too. I did judge James by his financial status, even though I didn't think I was that kind of person. When Devin offered me a more comfortable life, I took it, and I justified it by telling myself I deserved better. But better shouldn't be measured in dollars. James was always a good father and a good partner in the ways that actually mattered. I just couldn't see it because I was too focused on what we didn't have instead of what we did. That's on me, not him. James felt a strange closure reading those words. Rachel was taking responsibility for her part in their marriage's failure. She wasn't letting him off the hook for his deception, but she was acknowledging her own blind spots. Maybe eventually they could actually co-parent effectively. Maybe their children could grow up with parents who, while no longer married, respected each other and worked together for their kids' well-being. Daddy, the mac and cheese is boiling over, Noah called from the living room, and James snapped back to the present, quickly lowering the heat on the stove. Crisis averted, he called back and heard his children giggle. This was his life now. Billion-dollar business decisions in the morning, boxed mac and cheese and children's laughter in the evening, board meetings and bedtime stories, strategic planning and soccer practice. It was messy and complicated, and nothing like the fairy tale ending he'd once imagined when he'd walked away from his fortune in search of authentic love. But it was real, and after everything he'd been through, real was exactly what James Crawford had always wanted.